Alright, we got a different kind of video today. Basically, this is going to be my thoughts on this video. This is by Sam Strings. He has 95,000 subscribers, and the reason I'm making this is because I feel like many of his viewers, especially more inexperienced viewers, will just take his word for all of what his points. And his points, what I mean by his points is he basically in this video he talks about the variations in HO/OO scale steam locomotive mechanisms. Like the different, for example, like coreless motors versus regular cord motors, or 3-pole versus 5-pole motors. He talks about all these in detail, and I think it's really cool. I would recommend this video. However, there's a few points that he made that he's very biased in. So basically, he talks about multiple points, and then he basically very clearly states which one he prefers. Although I think in some cases, which again I'm going to point out, he's more biased toward, in my opinion, the worser option. And in particular, there's 2 points that I think he made wrong. One, he talks about how cordless motors are inferior to cord motors, and the second point he makes is the way steam locomotives pick up power. And actually, I'm going to go into that first. So in his video, he talks about how there are 2 ways to pick up power in a steam locomotive. One way is basically where the wheel, right, the tires, which is the outer rims of the wheels, are metal, and then everything else, so the actual middle of the wheel itself is plastic, and then the axles are metal, but they're insulated because, again, there's plastic here. And the first way is basically where you have copper contacts, which basically wipers, which basically touch and push against these tires. They look like this, these little tiny, really small copper contacts, and they basically push against these and pick up power that way. And yeah, so that's the first way. And the second way is basically where the entire wheel and part of the axle is metal, and same on this side. And then there's a little plastic piece in the axle, part of the axle in the middle, that basically splits those so it doesn't short out, because you don't want these to touch. If they touch, they short out the engine. So that little plastic thing in the middle, separates those. And this way, basically the bearings, or the part where the axle touches the chassis, basically where that place touch, it picks up power. So basically the chassis is powered that way, and usually the chassis is split in half, so one side is one track and the other side is the other track. Now he basically prefers this setup, and I'm saying that this setup is better, and here's my reasoning. So he said that so the reasons, okay, so this one, it's nice. You have a metal axle, which is obviously is better than part of the axle being plastic, and then also he says it makes like cleaning easier, and also depending on how if, like, in this case there's no bearings, it makes it inferior, and how this side is just, I guess, easier to clean. But I fully disagree with that. Here's my reasoning. First off, the tiny little copper wipers, right? These are tiny. They're little tiny pieces of copper that push against the thing. They're really small. There's very little surface area that's actually touching between the wiper and the wheel, and that is because if you have a lot of surface area that's touching, it'll create a lot more friction in the system, which you obviously don't want. So as a result, it's a really small, little tiny piece of copper. Because also another reason is because otherwise it'd be way too noticeable. So you have a really small piece, you can hide it, right? And the downside with that is because there's so little surface area, there's actually, from my experience, I find that it actually is a poor way to pick up power, because oftentimes with this so little surface area, a little bit of dust or something like that will get into it, and it will just absolutely ruin the pickup potential of those wipers. Another thing is, with those wipers, you have to now clean both the surface of the wheel and also the inner flange, and also the pickup, obviously. And that is just too much of a pain. Dirt obviously gets into there eventually, and the wipers are little tiny small ones, and they can easily be bent by a finger or something like that when you're putting the engine back together, and that's just a pain. And so as a result, cleaning is worse, the operation is, I guess, worse, and there's a little tiny more friction inside the system. Now, bearings. There's many advantages to bearing pickup. First off, it doesn't add any more friction because you already have bearings either way with this version too. And the bearings simply just pick up power that way. He talks about if you accidentally use, non-conducting oils, it might interfere with the system. I have, in my 10 years of experience, over 10 years of experience, I've yet to have that become an issue, because with so much extra surface area along this entire bearing piece, right? with all that extra surface area, there's bound to be at least one point where the bearing touches the actual axle where electrical contact can go through. The oil, in my opinion, from my experience again, never interfered with this issue. I find that this consistently picks up power better than the other version, which only has a little tiny bit of surface area. And no matter what kind of oil I use both Labelle and also Bachmann Easy Lube light oil. Those, again, in my opinion, again, from my experience, has never interfered with electrical pickup because, again, there's just so much more surface area that can go around it. Another main downside is, again, the plastic axle thing in the middle. However, yes, if you use cheap nylon like Bachmann did, or even Lifelike, the old Lifelike, those plastics will crack with age and they'll make it all loose and shit like that, and so you gotta replace it, which is a royal pain. However, a properly made, good quality plastic axle will last for ages, and that's what most other manufacturers do. In fact, in the US, this version is standard. You'll see that on Lifelike, Walthers, Walthers Pro 2000, I meant, Broader Limited, MTH, all of them use this version because it's just better. If you use a good kind of plastic, it will last forever. The plastic isn't under any strain either. The only strain it is on is tension. There's no compression. There's no twisting force on the plastic, so it doesn't damage it that way. So it's perfectly fine. It doesn't really need any force. All it does is just hold the wheel together. Again, there's no twisting force or anything like that, so it's not under any pressure. So plastic is honestly more than fine. So yeah, like that's the reason why this is, in my opinion, just a superior setup. This plastic just holds just as well, and it picks up power much better. It has less things to clean, less things to worry about, less things to potentially break, less finer, pieces in the engine that you gotta, take care of or replace every once in a while. And another thing is, these things wear out very quickly. Now, maybe if you run them only like once every week and only for an hour, they'll be fine. But if you think about like a starter set, like a train set, right, that a kid runs under the tree for hours each day, these things will wear out very quickly. And it's just not good. The bearings, they'll last ages. They'll last literally forever. And ultimately you want an engine that runs last a lot longer. So yeah. That's why I think this version is much better. Now, the second point he makes is coreless motors. Now, I can't get into too much detail in this case. I can't get into too much detail without becoming very, very boring. But in short, a coreless motor is basically a more efficient in the sense that it provides more power / more torque. It can operate smoother, and it has a larger speed range, and it runs again very consistently and smoothly throughout the entire range, whether it's very slow or very fast. It's also smaller. It's much more compact. The design is much more compact. And so as a result, what happens is when you have a much smaller but yet more efficient device, sort of like a laptop with a very powerful CPU or GPU, it becomes very hot. And so that's actually one of the downsides, is that they tend to overheat. But if you have a die-cast chassis like this or this, it should be fine. It should not be a problem. Also, you're not running at a full speed all the time, so it should be fine. Another thing is they tend to be more expensive. Now, that is a downside, especially the nicer ones like Faber. I don't know how to pronounce it, but basically there's like the Swiss and German companies who make these coreless motors, and they are amazing. They run super well, and they're very high quality. That being said, it's kind of expensive. They're like 30 to 50 bucks, and even cheaper ones are fine, but they're still more expensive. They definitely are at cost, and that's the reason why coreless motors, because they perform so well and they tend to be a little more expensive, they tend to be listed as a feature in a product. You'll see that in their features. I don't have a web page loaded, but they'll tend to say coreless motor as a feature because they are more efficient, they're more powerful, they for the same size and weight and stuff like that, they perform better. Now, Sam's Trains doesn't like those because in his experience, and I agree, seeing his videos where he does operate a coreless motor engine, it seems like those engines look worse or run worse. I don't know what happened there. Maybe it's the design of the gearing towers, things like that. Coreless motors are more susceptible to poor gearing and more in binds and mechanism. I'll get into that in more detail. Actually, this is a script for a future video where I go into extreme detail into motors, and I haven't written gearing, wheel pickup, and chassis yet, but I'll be writing a really long script for each of these things, which will go into much more detail about each of the 4 points that he makes. But long story short, coreless motors technically should be better. There's maybe a variation between binds in the mechanism, gearing problems, or cheap coreless motors that the models that Sam gets tend to just operate worse for some reason. But technically speaking, cordless motors should be operating better. There also might be maybe his controller. He uses the feedback controller, which are not designed for cordless motors, so go figure. But on paper and in practice, cordless motors should be better. However, for some reason, I guess in his experience, it's just not. I don't know why, but just because he's having inferior experience doesn't mean that everyone is. And there's actually many, pages and things like that that prove that cordless motors are better. Darth Santa Fe, one of my personal favorite YouTubers who do regearing, repowering, remotoring. He loves using cordless motors, and his engines run so well. So um, I guess basically it's based off personal experience. But just because one YouTuber has poor experience with cordless motors doesn't mean that it's an inferior product. Okay, it should. I think CAN motors and cordless motors are both fine. I think they both have their positives and negatives. However, I guess it's just personal preference, but I wouldn't let just one person's experience interfere with yours. So anyways, that's pretty much it. Everything else in this video makes a lot of sense. Traction tires, I also hate traction tires. He talks about open frame motors, which are kind of crap. He talks about a bunch of the things, and ultimately I'll be making a much better, well edited video with this script, which will go into much more detail about other things, like for example, why you want copper/brass pickup or bearings. You don't want steel bearings. That's actually inferior. And the reason is because if the axle is steel, you want the bearing to be made of a softer metal. So brass and copper, which are softer than steel. In fact, actually brass is softer than copper. So you technically want a copper bearing. And that actually goes the same with gears. But since the axle is moving and the bearing is not, you want the thing that's not moving to be a softer metal. So yeah, you want the bearings to be copper and brass, and the wheel, and basically, so more detail about like material choice and dimensioning and stuff like that. So anyways, stay tuned for that. I'll probably do that when I come back from college. Right now I'm in college, as you can tell. This video is very unconventional for me, but yeah, I just wanted to make a few, I guess, minor complaints about his video. Overall, it's a very well made video, but again, I just wanted to make out, be the devil's advocate for some of his points. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.